Hey everyone, welcome to today's live stream. Today we're going to be discussing and ranking every single arc in One Piece. It's been a while since I've talked One Piece, like I think over a year on the channel. And so today I was like, man, I really need to watch or talk about One Piece because Egghead has been so good and I'm just like in a mood to talk One Piece. Um, and maybe full video essay will come out soon on the channel. But for all of you who maybe have joined in and started watching me for my IQ content later on, you might not know that I have made a ton of One Piece. And actually I caught up to One Piece from the time that I think I stopped watching it or reading it at Skypiea when I first started, watching One Piece since it first came out. And I'd fallen off on it for a while. And so early in this channel, like, I don't know, like 5-6 years ago, I reread all of One Piece and turned it into like a vlog. And it's a really, those videos are terrible, but they really helped me find my style on YouTube. And so I definitely want to talk more One Piece, just in general, even though it's not something that, I've made a lot of content on recently. So I was like, what better way than just kind of casually talk about every single arc? So just like I did for the Haikyuu match video, I'm going to be discussing every arc in the series, starting from Romance Dawn through Egghead. If you were caught up on a part of One Piece, I'm going to do it in chronological order. So, no need to worry about spoilers when we get to the arc that you're at. Just pop out. No need to keep watching. And so we'll just kind of go through, discuss everything. But before, we bring the tier list up, which I will do in a second here, I just want to do some, channel updates, things like that real quick. So hopefully you guys have seen my most recent video that released yesterday, Jujutsu Kaisen Shibuya Incident X Chimera Ant arc. I really had a lot of fun making that video. So if you haven't watched it, check it out. I think those arcs are so good. And so I think, if you guys are fans of One Piece, or you're probably a fan of JJK and Hunter x Hunter, so I think you should check it out. Also upcoming, I'm working on a really fun video about manga covers. It's very different than kind of the videos I typically do. And so I'm excited for that to release. So that should be out in a few days here. And also for streaming in the future, still trying to do one a week. And actually in a week or two, I might go up to two, and maybe we'll talk about this a little more at the end of the stream. But I'm really interested in kind of talking about my favorite anime. And so I'm thinking of doing like a 4 or 5 week extra stream a week, which is talking about my favorite anime, top 50 anime of all time, where we'll talk about like 10 of them. So I might be doing that. So be on the lookout there. So those are just kind of some updates. The next watch along will be up pretty soon here for voting and stuff. So the next couple days. So be on the checkout for that. And, if you want to support the channel, consider checking out my Patreon and joining me on some watch alongs. Hello. Looks like we got a couple people in here, which is good. And so we might as well get started here. So here's the tier list. Again, I've got it ranked in chronological order or setup. Should be, at least we'll find out as we go along. And so first order of business, as always with these tier lists, we're going to talk about the ranking system. So Peak is absolutely one of the best arcs in the history of anime and manga, or one of my favorite arcs in the history of anime and manga. Flawless is, I mean, I can't say there's anything wrong with it. There's just maybe a couple arcs that I think are slightly better. This is One Piece we're talking about. Every arc is good. Like, there's no terrible arcs. And so you got to figure out a way to find some differences between the ones at the top. Minor issues, maybe it's went on for too long. Pacing, it wasn't the greatest villain of all time. Things that aren't huge deals, but in the context of One Piece, definitely separates things. Mixed is going to be ones that I maybe didn't vibe with totally. And then mid, which I don't even know if there's going to be a lot of these, but I didn't want to put like bad or anything, because none of these are bad. So mid is just kind of, these arcs were definitely my least favorite throughout One Piece's run. But there's still some things to like, but overall just like not as good as you typically hope for One Piece. And so we can kind of dive right in here. Romance Dawn, the first arc, getting it started off. And again, it'll be in chronological order. You know, if you've only watched till Impel down, like we'll talk about it then and then move on. And I'll probably do a little recap once we get to time skip, so we can kind of evaluate what One Piece is like before time skip, after time skip, and my feelings on everything. So yeah, starting out here with Romance Dawn. I think Romance Dawn, like, there's nothing wrong with it, so it feels kind of weird putting it into minor issues, but I feel like because of its length, maybe that's the only issue with the arc. And so Romance Dawn's a great start to the show, and I think it's better than like some people give it credit for. Even it does a great job at introducing Luffy and his backstory and his dreams. It's only a couple of episodes or a handful of chapters, so it's pretty short. The introduction of Zoro is phenomenal. And yeah, there's not a ton to be said with a couple of these first arcs, because this one is so short that it just doesn't compete when you talk about some of the big hitters later on in the series. But it does what it's trying to do really well. So my only issue is that maybe it could have been longer, or, you know, maybe it could have been compiled into a couple arcs. But we're talking about, you know, Oda finding his style here in the beginning. Like, you can't really poke many issues at it. So that kind of brings us into Orangetown, which I'm going to put in mixed. I don't think it's quite as good as Romance Dawn. Romance Dawn just feels really focused and has such a great introduction with Zoro. Buggy is fun at the beginning, but he's not, you know, like, he goes on to become so much more after this arc. Here it's like whatever. And so I do think it plays a little bit into, you know, how we kind of view the early One Piece, which is these first couple arcs. Maybe it takes a little bit for Oda to find his footing. But man, Buggy is such a great character that is still fun, but it really doesn't. This first Buggy encounter doesn't hold a candle to the things that Oda will be doing later on in the series. And yes, I agree that I found this tier list. Thankfully, I didn't have to take the time to do most of these. But it's really nice. And I feel like for tier lists down the road, if possible, finding or making ones that have labels on them, because it's so hard to see sometimes. So I totally agree with that. And it makes it easier for me, so I don't have to remember the names. Like with the Haikyuu one, a couple of those team names escaped my mind as we were going through this. And so, yeah, Syrup Village, infamous Syrup Village up next, right? Like, I think Romance Dawn and Orangetown, they're so short that you can't really pick any massive flaws with them. They're definitely not in the mid territory, but they definitely are just pale in comparison to what we get down the road. And Syrup Village is one of the weakest arcs, I think, in the entire series. Usopp is definitely at his like worst. He's really annoying. It goes on so much longer than Romance Dawn and Orangetown. And even though, you know, when you get to the end of the series, it's like, well, that's not that long at all. But characters that we're hanging out with and our understanding of the world building and the stakes, like, it's almost like, why wasn't this a little bit quicker? Because there is some pretty cool things with the first, you know, Kuro being introduced. I think that's his name. Our cat glasses boy. He actually is a step up, I think, over Buggy in terms of a new villain being introduced, even though Buggy is definitely a better character, but like just in the context of their own arcs at the very beginning of the series. I think he's phenomenal, and it just stinks that there's so much fluff with this arc. And it's like, I just remember like pages or episodes of, you know, when they're stuck and Luffy can't run up, you know, a slope. And it's like things like that I think hold this arc back a little bit, but it still is Usopp's introduction. Like, this isn't necessarily a bad arc in comparison to other shonen arcs. It might be better than a lot of them. But as far as One Piece, it's one of the weakest arcs in the series. It feels like it goes on for too long, even though it's not that long. It has good characters, but also a lot of mediocre characters that get annoying. And it's kind of interesting because at Syrup Village, you know, so far it's like, well, we had a pretty good start, and then I feel like the story gets a little bit weaker these couple of arcs. But thankfully, Baratie comes in and is just an unbelievable arc. I'm gonna put it at the top of minor issues, mainly because there's so much more to come. But Sanji is like one of my top three favorite characters in the show. He's so good. So wherever if my Sanji fans are watching, let me know. Sanji is unbelievable. His introduction's great. Oda does take on a little bit of a longer arc, but I think the depth to the characters is just so much more. You have the introduction of Mihawk in this arc and his fight with Zoro, which is like still one of the most iconic fights in the series. Which is insane. And then, Sanji's such a great character, and his backstory is also a step above what you get in Syrup Village with Usopp. Like Usopp's backstory just doesn't quite hit compared to Sanji, compared to Zoro, and compared to Nami, who we'll see in a little bit here. And I think backstories are the lifeblood of One Piece, and so if you aren't coming out with one of the best, it's going to make the arc a little bit weaker. They're often the linchpin of so many arcs. Yes, almost done with my rap that I'll send you. Yeah, send it over. We'll see if I can, I'll definitely listen to it. I don't know if my rap skills are quite up to snuff here, but I'd love to listen to it. And yeah, Sanji really got a goated backstory twice. He certainly did. And this one, the first one is still like, it's, of course it's good enough that you don't necessarily need the next one. The next one's just like icing on the cake, but it is, the way that Chef Zeph, sorry, like for him to sacrifice his leg for Sanji is insane. And it's such a great snapshot about how characters are written in One Piece, the lengths that they'll go, like the kind of depth of some of the pirates' heart is so good, and it's on display in that backstory. And then the way that they interact in Baratie, and how he lets him leave at the end, and how their kind of dynamic is so interesting, because they're not just, this is too good, icing on the whole cake. It really is, isn't it? It really is, but we'll talk about whole cake plenty later. But yeah, Baratie is really a step up from the first three arcs. It really, I think, defines where One Piece is going to go. And it is like, there is a pretty big difference, I think, between Baratie and Romance Dawn. And so because of that, I could see there being some distance in between them. Maybe I'll move Baratie up to flawless, or maybe I'll move down to Romance Dawn to mixed. But I definitely think there's some space between those two, but I think that will naturally happen, I think, as this goes on. Have I heard any Rustage raps? Of course. Yeah, Rustage is awesome. I've never really talked to him very much. But when I was first starting on YouTube, I feel like his raps were unescapable in like the best way possible. One of my favorite ones is actually like not super popular, but it's about Gon, and just like a great Gon rap is definitely the one I've listened to the most. And Rustage is just like such a great creator. Anything he does interests me. So back to the tier list, Arlong Park, definitely in flawless, arguably in peak. Like, if Baratie took it a step above with the first three arcs, Arlong Park knocked it out of the park. Wow, we're really keeping up with these with this and Whole Cake. Yes, Rock Paper Scissors. Yes, that's the one. Great song, you guys should all check it out. If you like Hunter x Hunter, and check out my recent video on the Chimera Ant arc. Arlong Park it's longer than everything that's come before it. It has Nami's backstory, and the way Luffy and the rest respond to Nami's backstory, I think, is really critical here, and really sets it apart. I think it's different than, like, I think Sanji, the content of Sanji's backstory is maybe more interesting, but the reaction that Nami currently has to Arlong, and the reason, the justification for why she left them at Baratie, and her asking for Luffy's help, and Luffy putting the hat, like, I mean, come on, that's one of the best moments in One Piece. It is the moment, it is the barrier. It is, if you get there and you don't like One Piece, then like we can't be friends. Like that is the moment that seals the show. That's the moment that makes it so where you see the potential of where we're going and just how well the story is. It's unbelievable. It still holds up well. Luffy's fight with Arlong's really great, and there's also a lot of fun creativity in the arc. Like when Luffy sinks to the bottom of the ocean and they swim his head up to let him breathe, like I think there's a lot of little things like that in Arlong Park that just highlight how Oda's really found his footing here in the last two arcs, and it withstands, well over 1,000 chapters of material as some of his best work. And it also lays the groundwork in a similar way to Baratie, to later arcs in the series, and Arlong coming up in Fishman Island. And I think that arc, which we'll talk about later, of course, is strengthened by Arlong Park because Arlong's such an interesting character and set up such interesting dynamics to the world. The world is so much more nuanced than it comes about in those first handful of arcs, and it really is Arlong and the racism towards the fish people and how it's manifested in a really violent way for Arlong just becomes such an interesting thematic base for where One Piece is going to go. How do you feel about the live action adaptation of East Blue? I think they did a pretty good job. Actually, I think that might be the last video I made on the channel about One Piece was me talking about will the live action fail or will it succeed, and just kind of like anticipating it. And then I was going to make a video reacting to the live action. But then I just got so busy with work at the time that I wasn't able to do it. So I think they did an overall great job. It's so hard to adapt anime to live action. And, I'm a movie obsessed person. And I watch a lot of TV as well, live action, and it's the things, some of the camera work that they did, I think the sets that they built really embodied the world of One Piece. Like everyone, I don't love the decision to include Garp. I get why they did it because it keeps Kobe, in the foreground. But other than that, like, I do think that they kind of missed an opportunity, but also, because it would be so cool to see the Garp reveal way later on, but it's like, who knows how long they're going to get. They have to make sure that this is palatable for a new audience. And the reason that I know that the live action succeeded is because my dad, who doesn't watch anime and he's in his 70s, I somehow convinced him to watch the One Piece live action. Like somehow I was like, you should watch this. And he did, watched, the whole season, was like, I really wish there was a season 2 out right now because I would watch this right now. And his description was something like, it's pretty wild, but it's good. And it's like, that reaction from my dad, whose only experience with anime is taking me to like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh movies when I was a kid, and him not enjoying them, is pretty cool. And that's the whole purpose of the live action, is to introduce it to people like that who never would have read the manga or never watched the anime. And it allows the storytellers to really, or the filmmakers to explore this world in a different way. And so I'm all in for the sets, the actors' performances, even if some of them aren't the truest to the nuances of some of these characters. Like, does Luffy's actor really hit the intensity that Luffy has versus just the comedy? Zoro, does he have the heart, and not just the cool badass swordsman? So I think those elements are definitely things to be thinking about. That I'll be thinking about going later on, but it's like they encompass the world in live action. I couldn't have asked for more. And I just can't wait for season 2. I hope they continue doing great things. And I know that one of the showrunners, Maeda, is I don't know if he's less involved. I know he's less involved. I don't know what his level of involvement is. That worries me a bit because he seemed like a big reason why season 1 was so successful. And so I am worried about that. Steve Maeda, I think, is his name. But yeah, Arlong Park elevates One Piece's story to like an insane degree. It still holds up as, one of the very best shonen arcs. It's very close to peak. I could move it to peak, but I do think One Piece has 3 or 4, just off the top of my head, more iconic, better arcs. So because of that, Arlong Park's a bit lower. Oh, we do have a mix-up here. Loguetown is next. Um, I'm gonna put it at the top of mixed, and I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion. It has some good things going for it. Obviously, Dragon and Smoker are great, and it just kind of is a nice reset into where the story will go. But it's not that long, and I don't think it executes quite as well as Romance Dawn. So because of that, I lean to the top of mixed. Like, does some really cool world building things, um, but doesn't quite have the, like, I think about Zoro's introduction in Romance Dawn as a reason it kind of moves up to minor issues, because even though these are small arcs, they don't. It's hard to pair them against the Arlong Parks and bigger arcs of the world. Um, but it's actually, I cannot wait to see it in the show. Like, it's perfect for something you'd want to see in live action. Um, but in terms of its impact on the overall story, it's good, it's fun, but it's not something that I think, you know, invites the thematic weight and emotional weight that a lot of these later arcs do. So I'm going to put Loguetown in top of mixed for now, and Reverse Mountain is in a similar spot for me, um, but I'm going to put it above Loguetown. I'm having trouble here. Moving around, them getting to the Grand Line is just such a big deal that it's so great. And Laboon is one of the greatest characters ever. And so, but Laboon's good here. Laboon gets way greater in Thriller Bark, right? Um, so because of that, it's a fun little introduction to the Grand Line, but also I don't think it's kind of, instant kind of flow into, the Alabasta saga is necessarily the most interesting stuff that Oda has going around. And this is going to be a common theme with the next two, because I don't love Whiskey Peak or Little Garden um, that much. And so I'm going to put them I actually think Whiskey Peak is below Orangetown just because Bucky's introduction is so great, and I don't think the introduction of the other Alabasta or the numbered Alabasta villains is quite as good. And like the beginning of Alabasta Saga, I don't think is Oda's best work, especially compared to Arlong Park and Baratie. But Little Garden is definitely better. There's moments I like there more. It sets up where we're going hopefully soon pretty well. So I do think it's actually a decent step up, but all of it is mixed for me. Like it is, it's a stretch of story that I've seen a ton from growing up, with the Four Kids dub and, getting to Skypiea multiple times before I kind of caught up to the series post time skip. And it's part of the story that I kind of roll my eyes over when we go through. Like there's still some fun One Piece world building that never goes away. But I think Drum Island is a big step up in quality from them, and it kind of is the last time you get. Yeah, I think Whiskey Peak and Little Garden is really the last time you get two below average arcs in a row. Maybe one other time in the story it happens. And so Drum Island in the introduction of Chopper and Chopper's backstory and Luffy just climbing up the mountain, in the middle of winter is totally everything I love about One Piece. And it is also something I can't wait for them to do in season 2. And it's like the level of storytelling jump, I think, from Whiskey Peak, Little Garden to Drum Island is absolutely insane. It is so good. Chopper is such an amazing character with one of the best early beginnings. Like he of all the Straw Hats, like he holds that arc in a way that like as good as Sanji is in Baratie, better than Usopp is in Serb Village, better than maybe maybe not quite as good as Nami on Arlong Park, but he is so phenomenal. Again, the backstories are so important to the best arcs. When Oda nails a backstory, it means this arc's probably pretty good, especially when it's the major backstory of the arc. You saw it with Nami, Sanji, Luffy, and now with Chopper. And Whiskey Peak, Little Garden, it doesn't quite hit the same without those major backstories. And it is really a phenomenal arc. I think Baratie's maybe takes the cake for me because the ending's a bit unexpected with Nami leaving, and you have the beginning with Mihawk. Mihawk's one of my personal favorite characters. Maybe we'll do a character tier list that'll be about 7 hours long down the road. But yeah, it's Drum Island is phenomenal, and Alabasta continues being phenomenal. I prefer Arlong Park slightly. Like, I think the Alabasta saga isn't quite my top tier. I think a few people like it a bit more than me overall as a saga, but there's no doubt that Alabasta is a phenomenal inclusion and step up again in a similar way that Arlong Park is, but for very different reasons. Crocodile is such a phenomenal villain, and his fight with Luffy feels even more grand than his fight with Arlong, like to kind of an insane extent. And some of the side fights really step up here. The reason that it's not above Arlong is because of Nami and the emotion behind Nami and Arlong's relationship. That is so crucial to Arlong Park and crucial to making Arlong Park, so iconic, where Alabasta doesn't quite have that. But Alabasta does have Vivi, and Vivi's phenomenal here, and it has Robin. Both amazing characters. The ending of Alabasta is exceptional, and the ending of that fight and it also introduces such critical world building elements, and it definitely takes a step above Arlong Park in those world building elements. It feels grander than Arlong Park, but because it doesn't quite have that personal connection, I put it a little bit below. Alabasta would be above Arlong for me. It's when I really fell in love with the story and world building of One Piece. Yeah, I mean, that is very fair. I do think a lot of people have that, where Arlong Park, it's like, okay, this is good, I'm going to continue on with this. And then Crocodile is like, oh, he's one of the most badass villains I've ever seen. And the storytelling here is at such a wider view than Arlong Park, even because the East Blue is so segmented, and Alabasta is this pretty grand story. And it does get credit there for me of really, I mean, I think you're right in terms of you falling in love with the story and world building here. It is a better show of what One Piece will continue to be moving forward. But oh man, the Nami moment though, the Nami moment hits, and it hits so hard that I have to put it slightly above. But yeah, I mean, I think most people think Alabasta is the best arc in its own saga. And I definitely agree, and I think it's actually quite a bit better. And maybe the reason I slight Alabasta is because I just am a little bit lower on Whiskey Peak and Little Garden. In comparison, where Arlong Park feels so separated from Baratie, where Alabasta really is the continuation of the story that's been started. And maybe that's why, in my head, I kind of feel like it's a little bit lower than the others. So next up, we have Jaya, which is definitely a really interesting kind of sub-arc. And in terms of the connecting arcs, happens all the time throughout One Piece. Jaya is one of the better ones because of the introduction of Blackbeard, right? Like, Blackbeard's such a phenomenal villain. So I'm going to put this above Romance Dawn because the implications are so good, and it literally has one of the best quotes in the entire series with Blackbeard talking about dreams. The introduction is so subtle, yet Oda does such a great job at showing just how fundamentally opposing Blackbeard and Luffy are to each other. And Blackbeard's going to become so much more later on. but I love his introduction, and it's in such a One Piece way, like, in a pretty light tone that all of a sudden gets really dark and focused. And I love that about One Piece. I love the tone of One Piece, and Jaya really has that really well, even for a short arc. And it also, I believe, it introduces Bellamy. He's an interesting character. Um, I think it's just a great in between time. And it also introduces the big villain of the series. And it has that over a reverse mountain, a little garden, all of those in mixed. Jaya's introduction of Blackbeard and I think Bellamy set some great groundwork thematically. And so because of that, I think Jaya is in the minor issues, and the minor issues is it is too short. Like most of these ones, it's going to be either it wasn't long enough or it was too short to leave the impact that something like an Arlong Park or an Alabasta did. Skypiea is up next, and I do have an interesting story about Skypiea that I want to talk about before I rank it. Because Skypiea is where I initially stopped watching One Piece. I just remember they got to the sky. I got a little bit older. I was way more enthralled with Naruto at the time. And so I just kind of fell off. And that was the last thing I remembered was like, they're in the sky. And then I came to Naruto way later in high school. Came back to One Piece. I had just watched Bleach for the first time, and I was like, okay, I've, watched Naruto all the way through as it was airing. Loved Bleach. I loved One Piece, but just so long, and I just kind of fell off the train. Let's get through it. And I got to Skypiea again and stopped. And I was loving it, but it's a long series, and it's easy to fall off of. Anyone who knows when they've tried to catch up, at multiple different points, they fall off of it. And then when I started doing the One Piece vlog on this channel that I kind of talked about at the very beginning, where, that was just me kind of documenting each arc. In some of those videos, it was a vlog-esque thing. A lot of them turned into talking head stuff like this, and really developed kind of my style of making videos. But on that series, there's a big break if you look at the release dates for Alabasta and Skypiea. And it's because I got to Skypiea and I stopped reading the manga for like 4 or 5 months, even though I was still interested in it. So I had like tried 3 or 4 times in my life to get through Skypiea, and I kept getting just to the beginning of it. And for whatever reason, I would just kind of get burnt out. And so then finally I was like, oh, I can make more videos on this. I want to finish this stuff. And the second half of Skypiea absolutely blew me away when I read it. It's still one of my favorite things about One Piece. And so even though this arc slowed me down sometimes and slows a lot of people down, it's foundational to my understanding of what One Piece stands for. And it is without a doubt, I'm not quite flawless, not quite peak, but it's a flawless arc, and I actually prefer it to Alabasta. I think Enel is one of the coolest villains in the entire series. And I love the world building of Skypiea. And one of my favorite backstories is also, without a doubt, Nolan's. And I think the way that he ties your understanding of the history of Skypiea together, along with an emotional arc that you can get behind, there's really not many backstories for me that are on the same playing field. There's really one in all of One Piece that I think does as much for its arc for a character that is not a main character as much as Nolan's does for Skypiea. And the ending of it with, Sanji gets a great moment. Luffy has multiple moments. And of course, we've seen it connect to Wano now, and we've seen it connect to other big arcs. It can feel a little bit removed, I think, when you're first watching it. And I think there's something about how long Alabasta took, how kind of interesting Blackbeard is in Jaya to all of a sudden being totally removed from the grand line that I think stops a lot of people. And it stopped me because at the beginning of the arc, it's like, oh, this is just not connected. This is, I want to be playing, not playing, watching big players in the world, interact. And that's not the beginning of Skypiea, but the end of it is so crucial to where I got Haikyuu on the brain, to where One Piece's story is going, that I think it's one of the best arcs in the series, and it's one that I will reread just in isolation because I love it that much, even though it was the one that stopped me at multiple points, which I just find it hilarious that I love this arc as much as I do, considering how much it slowed me down initially to staying caught up with this series. I also think the manga does a bit of a better job than the anime here specifically. And I was anime only for a long time until doing the One Piece vlogs on the channel, where I read the manga. And I think the manga helps here. And I think with every arc in One Piece, the manga helps. Like, I don't think there's a single arc that the anime does better, for sure. There's moments, especially in some of the newer stuff. I still will watch the anime. I haven't seen it all in its entirety. I've seen some arcs, newer arcs out of context, kind of, some of my favorite ones, but the manga is just unbelievable. And I think Enel is a phenomenal villain. He's my favorite of the first big trio that we get with Crocodile, Arlong, and Enel. And I love his little chapters that he had at the beginning of chapters, or the little story he had at the beginning of chapters for a long time. And I'm excited to see if he hopefully comes back in the story. But Skypiea, I also think, is one of the most underrated arcs. Like, there's so many memes about, should you skip Skypiea, or I did skip Skypiea, and it really is fundamental, I think, to the series. It's like if you didn't watch or didn't read the Mugen Izaka versus Fukurodani match in Haikyuu, like, fundamental to how you understand the end of the show. And I think Skypiea plays a similar role, and it's just a great story on its own. And it's a massive arc, a massive undertaking for Oda. And yeah, in the beginning, when you initially get to it, it's like, what are we doing here? But when you revisit it, once it's concluded and you see everything that Oda's working into it, one of his best and one of the most underrated. Long Ring Long Land. I do not like this arc. This is my least favorite, I think. Definitely worse than Syrup Village. And after the end of Skypiea, just like sometimes people feel in the beginning of Skypiea, Long Ring Long Land is such a disappointment, I think. And especially compared to Jaya. Jaya and Loguetown feel like it introduces such interesting world building in between arcs, where Long Ring Long Land just feels like poor humor and filler episodes, even though it does have a cool ending. It's not terrible, like, it's not unwatchable, but I do think it is my least favorite. It is something that on a reread, I will be rolling my eyes at and just, like, trying to get through. Even though a lot of people like the humor of this arc, it just did not do it for me. And so I don't know if that's a hot take. I don't know if people, like, kind of love this arc, especially in the context of all of other arcs of a similar length. But yeah, Long Ring Long Land, I can't even remember the name of the guy that's in that photo here, the villain, but man, do I not like him. I guess the only funny moment is Sanji and Zoro's minds, right, where they are kind of dreaming. Isn't that in that arc? It's kind of funny. But other than that, I will leave that arc 10 out of 10 times. Water 7. This is an interesting one as well, because on first watch, I didn't love it as much as I thought I would. Right? Like, I thought it was going to be the defining moment of One Piece for me, where it's like, oh my gosh, this is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. And then I watched it and I was just kind of like, this is okay. That I do not hold that opinion anymore. I think Water 7's unbelievable. I love the setting of Water 7. And so I'm going to put it at the top of flawless. Um, the way that Water 7 unfolds, Usopp and Luffy's fight at the beginning of it is so incredible. The introduction of Frankie's great, and of course, everything. Is it CP9 or CPO? Is phenomenal, and Lucci and Kakazu and that entire crew um, is great. And it is, but specifically the world building here, like I love this kind of the architecture of Water 7. And so because of that, it really, really makes me want to return to the beginning of this arc. It's so much fun to hang out there with the characters there. And the reason it's not in peak is because it doesn't have the most insane ending ever, because it's leading right into Enies Lobby. Although the reveal that Rob Lucci's villain is phenomenal. Like that reveal is great, and yet everything that comes after is even better. And I'm putting Enies Lobby as the first step into peak shonen. Um, and that's also within the context of I've read all of One Piece. If I had only, if only up to Water 7 was out and I'd read that, I think I would have a different view on what's in peak. Like I think I'd have multiple arcs there. But Enies Lobby is my biggest change in my opinion of an arc from when I first read it on the channel to now is Enies Lobby. I didn't vibe with Rob Lucci the first time I read it. I didn't love him. I didn't think his impact was great on the story, but I think I looked over because the pacing was so great in Enies Lobby. I just had to get to the ending. That I missed over some of the nuances of Rob Lucci and his lawful kind of representation of how he views the Navy in the world versus Luffy and his views on freedom. They were very different. I didn't quite get that. And so his encounter left me wanting more. I do not think that way anymore, of course. And it has maybe my favorite moment ever, which is my other favorite Straw Hat, Robin. And I Want to Live is also one of the most iconic moments. I think it's arguably better than Nami's hat moment, although they're on the same playing field. Like we're kind of splitting hairs there, but it's as good as that moment. And it reinforces the Straw Hats and their connection to each other. And then Luffy's Gear 2 reveal is so unbelievably good, and it fits the series so well. We didn't need a training arc for it, right? Like it just makes sense when he does it, and it's so hype. And also it is a great example of side fights being executed well. And I think it's the best example, arguably, in all of One Piece of the side fights, right? And you think of Zoro versus, is it Kaku? I think I said Kakazu earlier. That's a Naruto character. Zoro versus Kaku. Unbelievable fight. Yes, Enies Lobby really is peak. And I love it so much more than I did, back in the day. And when I first read it, and it's what everyone loves about it. It's the pacing of it's phenomenal. It comes off the back of an amazing arc with an amazing reveal and somehow takes that hype and dials it up to 11. The pacing's great. There's fights and they all matter. It's just payoff after payoff. It doesn't go on for too long, and it has a bittersweet ending. And it also raises the stakes of the Straw Hats and the world building. Like it is everything that you look for in shonen battle series is captured in Enies Lobby. And it's really where I think when you get to this point, you're like, oh, this is what One Piece can be. This is a different level than basically any other show I have ever seen. Enies Lobby is where I became completely hooked on One Piece. Like how could you not? Like, and it's so funny that I kind of bounced off of it. I feel like I was trying to be contrarian on YouTube or something back when I first watched it, because it's so true. It is it's like, wow, I didn't know Oda's bag was this deep kind of thing. Like, so unbelievable. All of the villain side characters are interesting and fleshed out. The themes at the middle of each fight, specifically Rob Lucci versus Luffy, is so profound. And it also has iconic moments. It has ups and downs. It moves with pace. It never feels like it's going on for too long. It's the complete package. It's on the level of a Chimera Ant arc. It's on the level of, for me, a Shibuya incident. Um, of the best arcs in shonen anime. I'm thinking of those two other arcs because I just made a video on them, but it's one of the best, and it might not even be the best in One Piece. But I think a lot of people think it is. Like, it is kind of the culmination when you look back on all of these arcs on the potential that we've been building to, and in a great setting that, you know, has the nuanced and interesting navy, big players in the world, and huge moments emotionally for the characters. You know, Usopp's of course great, and or Soge King, unbelievable. Um, and so yeah, Enies Lobby is really captures everything One Piece could ever have been. And once it reaches that level, it's crazy how many more times Oda reaches a similar type of place. Post Enies Lobby is just above Jaya for me. The Garp reveal, if you were here earlier when we were talking about the live action, like, this is what we got robbed of, but good thing it still exists in the manga and anime, and it's unbelievable. The Garp reveal is so good. And the ending of post Enies Lobby, I can't remember if uh the Mary, is that at the end of Enies Lobby, or is that in post Enies Lobby? I can't remember which part it is. I feel like it's in post Enies Lobby. um but regardless, that moment is so right, like, everyone cries over a boat. Like, that's how good One Piece's storytelling is. And yeah, Post Enies Lobby's a good example of the in-between arcs being so good for One Piece. Um, and yeah, it's just Oda really flexing how good of a mangaka he is with Enies Lobby and kind of everything around it. Because I think part of the reason Enies Lobby hits so hard is because it's attached to Water 7. I typically view them the same in my head, you know, because they're so connected as much as almost any other arc in the series. Um, so yeah, Water 7 is phenomenal, and Enies Lobby's even better. Thriller Bark, I adore Gecko Moria, and I think that's a hot take. I don't think most people adore Gecko Moria. I'm going to put this above Skypiea. I love the vibes of Thriller Bark. I think the humor is so good in Thriller Bark. Um, and for some reason, I really vibe with Gecko Moria. I don't quite, it doesn't quite go enough. I think some of the fights are good, but not all of them are the greatest. To, you know, to put it in peak, but Gecko Moria and everything surrounding him, I'm so interested in it, in thinking about it, learning about it. He is the next figure for my collection. I have to get him in my figure collection for sure. But of course, you can't talk about Thriller Bark and not instantly talk about Nothing Happened. Right, the end of the arc with Zoro and Kuma's introduction, or not introduction, but kind of the first time he meets the Straw Hats, is phenomenal. And I think the vibes of Thriller Bark really do it for me. I think there's a lot of people it doesn't really work for, the horror kind of vibes. But I like the horror, I like the humor. It doesn't reach the levels for me of the what just came before it. And I think it's another arc kind of like Skypiea that can frustrate people when they get to it, because like Water 7 and Enies Lobby is the vibes and the feelings that everyone wanted in Skypiea. Thriller Bark feels kind of similar because it comes in between another major event. But I adore Thriller Bark, and it's mainly off of vibes that I love it. Vibes and humor. I think it's I just love to spend time here. And also Brook, like Luffy asking Brook to join the crew is again like one of the funniest moments. And then it's followed up by like when Luffy just sticks a zombie back in the ground. Like, it is the example that you think of, with your favorite series like this. Like, well, what if Luffy was in a horror? What if he was in a zombie movie? How would he react? And this is how he'd react. And it's so funny. And it's kind of, and yet it still has story behind it. Like, I don't think I'd put it this high if it didn't have more than that to offer One Piece. But it does go kind of, I think it's on a similar ballpark with Skypiea and Alabasta. Like, I would not fault you if you liked Alabasta more than it. Like, I think most people probably do, but vibes, Thriller Bark takes it for me, and is so phenomenal. It's probably because I just randomly love Gecko Moria, and I feel like I should probably make a video about him, and about how much I love him and how he's the most underrated warlord for sure, because he's arguably the coolest. Like, let's be honest, everyone. Gecko Moria rocks. And for a lot of people, Thriller Bark is a bit of a dip. Not really for me, but I mean, technically kind of, right? Not quite as good as Water 7 and its lobby, but it moves right into such an unbelievable stretch for One Piece. Sabaody Archipelago is flawless. I can't quite put it above any of the biggest hitters, but it is the best in between arc. And you think that they're going to really take this step forward, and you're kind of coming high off of Enies Lobby and Thriller Bark, and you think, man, our Straw Hats are tough. And the shock of Sabaody Archipelago, and especially because One Piece's structuring can be so similar, that Luffy getting his ass handed to him is monumental when it happens, because it's taken so much time really for it to happen like this, that I think 100% Sabaody Archipelago floored me when I read it for the first time. And I love the design of the island is so much fun, and the introduction of Law and of Kid is also phenomenal, and all of the Worst Generation. And the moment that really puts it on top, even outside of Kuma, wiping the floor with everyone, is Luffy punching the Celestial Dragon. And that is a moment, right? There's moments of the anime that are so good, and that's one of them. Like, man, did they bring it in that episode. That's a moment you have to watch, or like I'll rewatch all the time if it pops up on YouTube. Luffy punching the Celestial Dragon is unbelievable. And so Sabaody Archipelago, I think, is pretty important for the story and allowing the story to grow, because it's a huge loss for Luffy for the first time. And Oda is, he has his way of structuring stories. He has his ideas on how he's going to do stories. There's always going to be some lightheartedness. It's going to hit some similar beats structurally. So anytime that he does something different or pivots, it always lands with impact. And Sabaody Archipelago is an example of that. Amazon Lily's good. Not insane. I'm thinking lower than Romance Dawn. Like, it just feels a bit inconsequential. I mean, we love Boa Hancock, right? Like, who doesn't? And it's an interesting island, but it does feel like it plays into Oda's, a bit of Oda having some fun. And I feel like it is not nearly as good as Sabaody Archipelago, and not nearly as good as what's about to happen. But it's still solid, and I think a little bit above those, beginning Alabasta arcs. Impel Down, I'm going to put at the top of minor issue. And honestly, it might be flawless, but I don't want that to be too big of a spot. But Impel Down is unbelievable. Buggy's reintroduction, like Foley, to the narrative is so good and so unexpected. The pacing of Impel Down, and yet the feeling of importance is massive. It's such a different vibe for One Piece than we've really seen And it all has such pressure, as it leads into Marineford. And all of you feel that a huge event is about to happen, yet everything you're reading about in Impel Down matters and is funny and introduces interesting characters and has like an interesting end for oh my gosh, why am I forgetting his name? The end for our Alabasta boy who comes back in the narrative. Um, why can I not remember his name? What number was he? Was he number 6? Um, Bon Clay. What a great character Bon Clay is. Um, and so his everything with him, it's like so good. And Impel Down is really where you see, oh, these characters are going to be coming back around a lot and they're going to be different and things are going to change about their perspective on situations, and villains can turn into allies depending on the situation you're in. And I think Impel Down captures that perfectly. And it's short, sweet, to the point, phenomenal arc. And then it leads into, it's kind of a lesser Water 7. Like it's just like not quite as grand as Water 7. Doesn't have quite as many insane reveals. And yet what it leads into is probably One Piece's magnum opus. Oda's magnum opus, Marineford, is probably the peak of One Piece right now. Probably the peak of shonen anime. Like it is Bon Clay Mr. 2. Thank you. But I believe it is Bon Clay right at the end of Impel Down. But Marineford is, I mean, what can you say about it? It's the war arc that when it comes about in One Piece, it's like for so long you've been waiting for all of these players to be in the same place, to really have Luffy be at the center of massive moments. And it's like it has happened with Enies Lobby and Thriller Bark. He defeats a warlord. In Alabasta, he defeats a warlord. But Marineford is on another level, and he's a small piece of the puzzle. And it doesn't matter who he fights. He can fight anyone, and they have the weight of a major big bad. You think of Doflamingo's monologue about war and who wins and who's good and evil. That introduces him really well and really sets a great stage for his arc down the road. It's unexpected, and like I was saying, when Oda does something out of the norm for his structure, it's always incredibly purposeful, and it usually hits with impact. And Ace's death is the example of that. Ace getting a hole in his stomach is still one of the most heart-wrenching deaths in all of anime, and it is so because people don't die in One Piece, right? Like Oda set out not to kill characters. That is a huge piece of his story and a huge piece of his storytelling. And so for that to happen after Sabaody Archipelago, after Luffy has already messed up and now he can't save his brother, and this death, he's not coming back, that's really the icing on the cake for why Marineford hits another level compared to Enies Lobby. And it's really weird because Marineford only has Luffy. Like, obviously that's the whole point, Luffy dealing it without the Straw Hats, but the Straw Hats are, everyone loves them, like, or everyone has a couple of Straw Hats that are probably in their top 5 characters in the show, not counting Luffy. And for me, it's like Sanji and Robin are my 2 that like I adore. They're not in this arc, and it's still my favorite. And it shows how good the world building is, and just how well he sets up this war. It is, shonen fans cannot wait for arcs where all of the characters are in one location, all of the most powerful characters, and they're duking it out in a huge battle. And I think most people are probably going to say Marineford is their favorite arc or a top 3 arc. And because of that, I do have it above Enies Lobby because it's so unpredictable. It has major consequences for the war, or for the world, I should say. And it also has consequences that really matter for Luffy and his perspective and leading into this time skip. And it is the moment, it really is even more so. Like Ennis Lobby is the show. Oda's like, this is what I can do. And then Marineford is, this is what I've been building to for so long. And it just floored me when I read it. It floors me when I think about it. It is the peak, I think, of One Piece so far. Uh, and it's just absolutely phenomenal. And thank you so much, Jules. Super chat for Marineford because it's the best. Thank you so much for the support of the channel. I really appreciate that. And yeah, Marineford is the best. It is just one of the greatest things I've ever read. I absolutely adore Marineford. Whitebeard's end is iconic, and how he won't fall on his back is just so good. And it really is Oda saying, like, yeah, I can write something with insane pacing, world defining events. And so yeah, Marineford is the tip of the iceberg for shonen storytelling. And then post war, I mean, everything around Marineford is great. Everything in this saga. Post war is probably right behind Romance Dawn. I'm So Weak is so good, and kind of leading into the time skip is so good. But I don't know if it's quite as good of a start as Romance Dawn is, but I think it fills a similar function. Beginning of the series, or the beginning of pre-time skip, beginning of series to the end of time skip, I should say, before the time skip. Yeah, post-war, great time. I mean, that moment is devastating. But that's really all the arc is. Return to Sabaody. I'm going to put it at the bottom of minor issues. It's really exciting to see everyone. It's really fun, but man, does it not, outside of being fun, seeing everyone doesn't really offer nearly as much as the first time they're at Sabaody. So because of that, I think it's kind of at the bottom of minor issues. It's good. I love that stretch of story because I love seeing the Straw Hats hang out and seeing them be hyped, and it's really fun seeing everyone be better. But I do think it's a bit disappointing. Like, I think there could have been a bit more to it, in the way that there was so much more to say about the archipelago. Fisherman Island is a big one. It is something that a lot of people don't like, and I do think out of all of the longer arcs, it probably is the weakest. And I'm maybe going to put it, I feel like I used to have this a bit higher, but man, has it not aged. I think it has minor issues. Like, I don't think it's like the worst arc ever. Definitely not. But I would put it behind Drum Island. Like, I think it is, of the arcs that get a bit longer, it definitely suffers, I think, a little bit. I do think Arlong strengthens it. You get a payoff to that arc, which is really good. But in terms of villain, like, is it Hoodie Jones is just so mid. Like, he is such a mediocre villain compared to Arlong. And I think that's really where the arc falls flat. Like, this Arlong is an amazing villain, and he's like them looking back on Arlong is like the best part of Fishman Island. Yeah, Fishman Island is mid. Yeah, maybe I have it a bit high. I put it there, and then as I'm talking about it, I'm running out of positive things to say. Outside of just, it's a really visually, it's a really interesting place, and Jinbei is incredible. Jinbei is, and obviously he's been introduced by now, but now I'm going to leave it here because it does have a little bit to it. I think thematically it's pretty important. But I do think a lot of people, honestly, I think a lot of people have it near Serb Village and Long Land. Just because of its length. It is one that doesn't justify its length, and is another key stopping point, I think, for a lot of people. Like, you think about the arc of people watching One Piece, and it's like Skypiea is a stopping point. Sometimes Thriller Bark is, Fishman Island, I think definitely is for some people. But yeah, totally agree. Jimbei is so goated, that I'm going to put it there. And I think, uh, yeah, I do like the conflict and the support of fishmen, and it's definitely an interesting wrinkle into, just into how they're treated. I just wish it had a better villain. I think if it did, it could have been a top of minor issues flawless level. If it wanted to reach higher than that, it needed some structural changes. Punk Hazard is also a minor issues for me, and I think it's just right above Fishman Island. Uh, this is like the reincarnation for me of Whiskey Peak and Little Garden, where these arcs are a bit longer. There's a bit more to them than the beginning of Alabasta, but they don't hit for me. Caesar, I think's okay. It can be a bit annoying. I do love the introduction of Kinemon and Momo and how that plants the seeds for Wano so early. Really good stuff. Law's great in Punk Hazard. Like, there's a lot of fun moments. And just like the way that the island has been impacted by the fight between the two admirals, or fleet admirals, I should say, is really, really fantastic. But that's all it has. Like, I think Caesar drags it down. I think Caesar and Hoodie Jones is like, man, these villains are so mid, and they hold down like really cool locations and a lot of hype. And so, just like the beginning of One Piece, the first couple arcs, I think, leave a bit to be desired. Um, Thankfully, Dressrosa is incredible, and I think it is in peak as well. I love Dressrosa. Doflamingo is maybe the best villain in the entire series. He is a level above Rob Lucci, I think. And then multiple characters died in Punk Hazard. That is true. Like, it does feel like it has a little bit of weight. I can't remember the guy that lost slices, but that's a great moment. So yeah, I think it has some good moments like that, but Punk Hazard doesn't go beyond it. But it's the momentum it throws into Dressrosa, I think, is unbelievable. The the Roman inspired Colosseum setting island for Dressrosa is really great. I think Doflamingo is the best villain, or at least so far the best villain of any arc. I love him. I hate him. Like, I love to hate him. His backstory is just super interesting, of him being a former celestial dragon, having this fallout, and now being, this kind of in between person. Like, he's not quite strong enough to compete with Kaido and Big Mom and people like that. And the ending, I think, is really great with him. Fujitora is such a great character. His introduction's great. I like Sabo. He's not my favorite character, but I don't dislike Sabo like I think some people do. And so because of that, like, it doesn't like drag it down for me. I really like the kind of nod of the head to Gulliver's Travels, with all the little boys running around, and is it Robin who first gets caught by them? Could be someone else. The hint that Usopp might have hockey. Like, there's so many great moments in there with just such a grand showdown and build up between Luffy and Doflamingo, and that's not even mentioning Law's role in Dressrosa, and how Law, his backstory is so good, and his relationship with Doflamingo is, S plus, right? Like, it's unbelievable. Maybe it gets a bit long. I think that's why I have it below Enies Lobby right now. Like, the pacing does drag out a bit, and it really, I think, Whole Cake Island, I think, or maybe they were just into Wano when I caught up, which is crazy to think about. But I remember going back and watching videos through kind of a lot of Dressrosa stuff and beyond. A lot of people got frustrated with the pacing of Dressrosa while it was coming out, but it was just kind of the classic cycle that One Piece has really gotten itself into, which any arc, when it starts to go on for a while, when you read it weekly, people get annoyed and upset with it, right? Like people get off the train. And so because of that, and yeah, the pacing is in Dressrosa is better in the manga. Totally agree. I've seen a little bit of the anime of this, and it's like, wow, they really start to drag some things out. And they have like these really long recaps at the beginning of every episode. That's like, what are we doing here? Like, just take a break and then come back and continue with the anime. But yes, the manga I think helps there for sure. And yeah, Doflamingo really lifts it above. Like, I think Doflamingo is definitely like a step above Rob Lucci, but the kind of force of Enies Lobby and the emotions behind Enies Lobby and Robin's big moment is a step above. And so I'll put it slightly above Dressrosa, but I adore Dressrosa. It's one of the best arcs. So that was a lot of fun. It's a minor issue, right? Like I think it's honestly right below Jaya. I love how it sends into the next arc, and you kind of come up to this mystery of where's Sanji at, what's going on here. But I don't think it does like a ton beyond that. And so because of that, I think it's in the minor issues category. And I can't really wait to talk about Whole Cake Island. I adore Whole Cake Island so much. Obviously, Sanji's like one of my favorite characters ever. So of course I'm going to love him. And it's the second best arc, I think, for me. It's actually pretty close to Marineford. Whole Cake Island is the more personal side, I think, of One Piece. Sanji's secondary backstory is incredible. Never ever would have imagined something like that would happen. And Oda knocks it out of the park, and it feels justified. I love the the setting, the Alice in Wonderland vibes. Alice in Wonderland is I love its aesthetic of Alice in Wonderland. It's so great, and Oda does it justice and really does some crazy stuff with Big Mom taking the lifespan of everyone. Yes, Katakuri versus Luffy, and Katakuri is one of my favorite characters ever. I made a video about him during this, I think during the One Piece vlog that I was making, where I like made a video essay about him as I was really honing in on that. And like, I don't even think 1,000, it got even 1,000 views. I've really been thinking about revisiting his character because he is phenomenal. He's one of my favorite characters in the show. He was the moment I first read the arc, and he still is. And his fight versus Luffy, I think, is the best fight in One Piece so far. It's up there with Rob Lucci for sure, but I think it's the best. And it's so interesting because he's a villain, but not really. And especially after the fight, he's not. The way that battle unfolds with, Katakuri gaining respect for Luffy is so good. I think the anime does a good job with it too, but it's still better in the manga. And I love the stuff between Sanji and Pudding. I think it's really interesting. And giving Sanji, an actual love interest of sorts, and having him tragically lose it really plays up this potential role for Sanji in the story, which is him being a hero type of character. This arc does great stuff for him. The aesthetics of this arc is great, has maybe the best fight, and it has really nuanced villains. I think Big Mom's pretty underrated. I definitely prefer her to Kaido. I think she's a lot more nuanced, a lot more scary than Kaido, honestly, especially in the manga for each. And her children are very varied. Cracker's kind of funny, and I think Pudding's great. And then obviously Katakuri is S tier. And then you also mix that in with Sanji and his family, and you get just like one of the most interesting arcs. Like I do want to revisit this arc in a video. Like I really want to look into it more, give my take on it. I feel like I don't know. I never know how good One Piece content does, so we're kind of starting it here with this tier list. But Whole Cake, I adore. I adore katakuri. Yeah, the aesthetics of Whole Cake are probably my favorite in the entire show of the island, so I totally agree there. And then a passionate Sanji hater, unbelievable. Sanji's the best, but I get it. You're probably a Zoro stan. I do like Zoro a lot too. But yeah, I mean, if a Sanji hater even liked him during Whole Cake, like it does show how great the storytelling is there, and Luffy refusing to eat unless it's Sanji's food is just like next level storytelling. So good. And so now we're to Reverie, which is such a hype. It's actually the first volume I ever bought of One Piece, at least since I was a kid, which I think is volume 90. It has a lot of Reverie in it, or maybe it's just the very end of Reverie. So that was like the goalpost. Couldn't wait to get there when I was catching up to the series, and it definitely does not disappoint. I think it's the second best in between arc, like a Sabaody Archipelago, Jaya, Zhao. I'm gonna put it right here. It's just like straight heat of world building questions we've been waiting for. It introduces new ones we could have never imagined. It like totally flips or deepens the stakes of everything and like the direction that the story is about to go in. Unbelievable stuff. From Reverie. So I adore Reverie. It's pretty short and sweet. If it went on longer, it probably would take away too much from Luffy. But I feel like I could have read 50 chapters of the content of Reverie. And then we've got Wano Country, which is definitely an interesting one. That was the last, I think, pure analysis video I made was on the conclusion of Wano. I made a video about it. Wano has many of the coolest moments in One Piece, I think. It is chock full of moments. I'm kind of moving around. I think right now it's right behind Water 7 for me. Maybe it could be above it. We'll see as I'm talking through it. One was very, very good. I do think the ending is slightly disappointing, mainly because of Kaido. I just don't think Kaido hits the levels of some of the very, very best villains. And so that disappointed me a little bit. But Odin's backstory is the other backstory like Nolan's that is one of the best in the series. He's one of the best characters. People love him, including me. And he's dead before the series even starts. His backstory is unbelievable and the highlight of the arc, I think, without question, because you also get a bunch of world building answered in it. Wano also has great aesthetics. I love really how Oda changed his art, really his art, the evolution of his art style, and how each arc is vastly different. It feels really defined in Whole Cake and Wano, and now Egghead. And so, yeah, I love the aesthetics. I think the beginning of the arc is very good, setting up the smile fruit and, kind of what's going on with that. Obviously, Luffy reuniting with everyone is just so great. Like, it's very good to have all of the Straw Hats in one location. Very, very good. The final battle's solid, but not. I just am disappointed with Kaido. Like, I feel like every time I read it, I feel like I'm missing a couple chapters with the ending because I feel like I'm missing the pure motivations or the pure understanding of who Kaido is. And I've actually read Wano many times for the video I was made on it because this is something I struggled with. And it's the only reason it's not in peak. And it could be like Rob Lucci that I'm missing something, and I hope it is. That may be down the road. I wonder how you guys all feel about Kaido. But I feel like I don't quite understand his character as much as I would want to. I don't quite buy into the way he acts, especially for how great of an introduction he has way earlier in the series, and all of the vile things he has done. He has done vile things. and he's been trying to kill himself for a very long time, and I feel like that doesn't get developed enough, and because of that, it's not quite in peak, and I put it slightly below Water 7, although I think Water 7, and Arlong are all very close and could flip on a different day. But we'll kind of do that once we get to the end here. Yeah, Wano is great, but it really dragged at some points for me. Yeah, I agree. I think its pacing maybe has some issues more so than Dressrosa. But I do think if you haven't reread it in its entirety, if you read it at points while it was coming out, you should do so because it is. I think all of these, once you, especially if you're reading them when they're coming out, if you give them a little bit of time and come back to it, they always feel a bit tighter because you're just waiting for things to happen. But I do think Wano's pacing is not quite to the level of the four above it. But yeah, Kaido is really what holds it back for me. There's great moments for a lot of the characters. Gear 5 is unbelievable. I can't believe that is like one of the first things I mentioned. I love Gear 5. One thing that I think is great about Oda is that he keeps the same tone throughout. He doesn't feel the need to turn the series darker. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely a direction that Naruto and Bleach went into. And it's a very common thing for a lot of these long-running serialized stories to eventually start kind of jokey to try to get people easily in, and then get very serious and stay serious. And sometimes slightly or just fundamentally changing the tone, whether it's a good or a bad thing, whether it's purposeful or not. That happens all the time. You think of, sections of Hunter x Hunter, right? Like that's what happens, but it does kind of, change a lot. Oda does a great job at keeping things light throughout, and Gear 5 is the culmination of that. And I think it's really, really fantastic use of a transformation that embodies the tone of a series perfectly. And so Wano is chock full with great moments, great designs, everything like that. Kaido just falls flat, maybe the pacing a little bit. What do you think of Bonnie in recent chapters? Personally, I hated how she could copy. Also, I guess minor spoilers if you haven't read. Personally, I hated how she could copy Luffy's Gear 5, but I'm excited to hear your opinion. So I think it's okay. It didn't bother me with so far. I've really liked everything, all of the development she's gotten in Egghead. But copying Gear 5, I thought it fit the humor, but I think we'll see later on if it becomes something that's utilized too much. I think it'll be frustrating. And I'll go ahead and put Egghead in here for now. Obviously this could change. I don't know exactly what chapter's out. I'm probably one chapter behind maybe. But I think Egghead's been very good. I'm going to put it at the top of minor issues. It hasn't quite, I thought it'd be a bit quicker than it is. And I'm seeing how it ends, because if, I do like all of the information we've gotten from Vegapunk, but I did think this would be a bit of a shorter arc, a bit closer to a Jaya or a Punk Hazard, or maybe not even Punk Hazard, like a Zhao. I don't know the exact numbers, but it feels longer to me at least, and I think it already is, but could be wrong there. So it really just depends on the ending. I think this could reach into flawless. I'm loving it. I love the art style change. Yeah, I totally agree with that. It has potential to be A or S, but where it's at right now is in the B or minor issues. Mainly because it hasn't, it's had some very good moments. Kuma's backstory is another one of those, like Nolan and Odin. I don't think it's quite on the level of those two, but a lot of people do, and for good reason. Kuma's a brilliant character, and I think Egghead does a lot for him that you've been waiting for. There's a lot in Egghead that we've been waiting for, and so I think overall it has a chance. I'd be kind of surprised if it made it to peak. Like, I think a lot would need to happen, but the encounter with Rob Lucci has been really fun. Overall, I think Bonnie has been very good. I'm curious to see as well how much her copying is implemented throughout the rest of the series. but overall, I can't quite put it in the flawless level. Like it hasn't quite reached, and it's hard for these kind of in between arcs. Like Sabaody Archipelago did so much in such a short period of time that's why it's kind of on the level of Alabasta, Skypiea, and Thriller Bark. But I guess here we are with all of the arcs. I'll just recap it. So definitely my peak arcs are Marineford, Whole Cake Island, Enies Lobby, and Dressrosa. I didn't always think Enies Lobby was this good, but it has really grown on me, and I've seen the light, I feel like, on it. These are four of the greatest arcs in all of anime from what I've experienced, which is a good amount of shows. And so because of that, absolutely adore these four. What's everyone's favorite? Is Marineford kind of a consensus number one, or do you guys have something like Enies Lobby or a different arc number one? I feel like a lot of people it's Marineford or Enies Lobby. Flawless, again, most of every big arc in the series I think is great, like Water 7, Wano, Arlong, Thriller Bark, Skypiea, Alabasta, and Sabaody Archipelago. Really, like the only one I'm not mentioning is Fishman Island as like a pretty hefty arc, maybe Punk Hazard as well, that does not quite reach flawless material. Like when Oda's in his bag, he's in his bag. For me, Marineford, yeah, love to see it. I totally agree. And really, you can kind of see that early One Piece, Syrup Village, Orangetown didn't quite hit for me, and then the beginning of Alabasta was kind of mixed for me. I'll always love everything Alabasta and before because of vibes, nostalgia, early One Piece, the kind of humor there. But I do think the heights that Oda would go on to reach is higher in the story. It's still a toss up for me if I prefer pre or post time skip more, because obviously, it's split in my top four arcs. Two are both, but Marineford is the last arc before the time skip, of course. But Water 7, a lot of those secondary arcs are pre-time skip, but the arcs do get bigger post. So really, I love all of One Piece. Like Long Ring Long Land is still like better than the worst My Hero arc, that's for sure. Probably better than the mid My Hero arc, right? Like that's kind of the levels we're talking about with One Piece. But yeah, so I feel pretty good about this list. I'm really excited to see Egghead and how it finishes, and I think it has a chance to get to flawless, but not quite sure yet. Kuma's backstory's great. It definitely is. So yeah, I want to make a little bit more One Piece content down the road. If you guys enjoy One Piece or want me to talk more One Piece, let me know. I definitely am still planning to do more and more streams. Again, I'll probably be doing a couple more tier lists for the next few weeks. And then I'm also on top of that might start a countdown of like 50 of my favorite anime and just kind of go through some of those. Cause I just, want to talk about my favorite things. And I really want to continue kind of developing a relationship with all of y'all. And kind of being able to talk with you guys like this and showing, some of my opinions on anime, and stories that, I don't always cover everything in the typical video essays that I make. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the Jujutsu Kaisen Chimera Ant video. I hope that the video finds its audience. It's always hard when it's not a Haikyuu video, when I first released them. And then be on the lookout for my video on manga covers, which is very different, but I think you guys will really enjoy it. It's like really stretching my kind of writing abilities. So I've had a lot of fun working on it, and still am working on it. Hopefully in a few more days that'll be out. So yeah, more streams coming weekly. Really appreciate everyone tuning in. Thanks for joining, and thanks for the super chat. That was great. That was my first super chat, the inaugural super chat, which is really cool. Yeah, if you guys want to support the channel, the best ways to to help make sure I can do more streams and kind of raise the quality of some of these streams is, check out my Patreon. We can always chat on Discord and, get your name at the end of every video. If you do the highest tier, you actually get to pick a short topic for me, like every 3 months of subscription, which is pretty fun. And just thanks for watching the stream at all. It's been really fun. This is the third one I've done. It was really fun to talk One Piece. I feel like I haven't talked this much One Piece in a while. So an hour and a half straight of One Piece talk was needed, I feel like. Thanks again. And I'll see y'all. Yes, thank you for watching and commenting. And I'll see y'all in the next one.